Cathedrals, these stunning, marvelous buildings, most built over 600 years ago during the Middle Ages, a time where most people worked on farms and had to grow their own food, a time where there was no electricity, no modern medicine, no machines, a time where, in Europe, the church had the highest power. The clergy were often the richest of the three social classes. They strived to own the most fertile land and the most livestock. They fulfilled the roles of both judge and jury. Their word was absolute, as they were in direct contact with the highest power. They were the representatives of God on earth, and they used their wealth to try to get closer to God. One way they accomplished this was by building cathedrals. Huge, extremely impressive and detailed structures, the result of an unbelievable feat of human accomplishment. Their goal was to build the most beautiful, breathtaking, and most importantly, tallest structures on earth as a way to reach out to the heavens in an attempt to get closer to God. These most impressive buildings were the result of thousands of people working towards a common goal in the course of several decades. Have you ever wondered who worked a whole day to carve that stone they're looking at? Have you ever wondered who climbed over 100 meters high up on the scaffolding to place down roofing tiles? Have you ever wondered who spent weeks carving beautiful patterns into the choir stalls? Have you ever wondered what it must have been like to see a structure like this through the eyes of a medieval peasant? Have you ever wondered who designed these structures and coordinated everything? Have you ever wondered how? How were these cathedrals built? How did they raise massive blocks of stone up so high? How many different craftsmen worked on a project like this? How did the people prepare the foundations? How did they put the roof framework into place? How did they make sure the building didn't collapse on its own weight? How did people with no machines or electricity accomplish something like this? That's what I want to explore in this video. A video 7 months in the making, hoping to convey my fascination, wonder and respect for the medieval builders. We will be taking a look at the complete building process from the foundations to the spire. Join me as we travel through time and explore a medieval Gothic cathedral construction site. It's the year 1216. There have been rumors going around about the bishop. He wants to build a cathedral a few kilometers from the big city. As there wasn't enough space inside of the city walls, it was decided to be built outside, in the forest around. A spot has already been chosen. This relatively flat area next to a river will surely turn into a thriving extension of the big city in a few decades. The river will not only provide a source of water and food, but it will also be a great cheap way to get resources to the worksite using boats. Right now, however, it's still just a forest. But this will change soon as the first woodcutters are on their way. They will start clearing the trees and foliage and build their own small houses, as this is quite a big project and they are sure to have worked for at least a year. Let's travel forwards in time for a few months, and now the clearing of the forest is underway. These woodcutters will be clearing the trees in the area to make space for what will be in the future one of the biggest cathedrals in Europe. But there's a lot more happening behind the scenes as well. The bishop, who has ordered the cathedral to be built and will be one of the highest financial contributors to the project, has appointed a master builder. This is a master mason, architect and project leader, and he will be the one designing the entire cathedral. He will have to find a compromise between the bishop's wishes and what's possible in reality. And this master mason is currently very busy drawing the first sketches of the cathedral. One of the first drawings, and arguably the most important drawing he makes, is a floor plan, just like this one I drew myself for this project. This is the floor plan of the very same cathedral that's about to be built here. Now, it's not by any means a perfect floor plan, but it's good enough to illustrate the layout. The cathedral has a cruciform plan, which means the overall shape of the cathedral is a cross shape with the top facing east. In the middle there's the crossing. This is the point where the arms of the cathedral come together, and this is also where the spire will be on top of the roof. In the north and south we got two extra extensions, which are called transepts. In the west there's the nave, each one of those sections is called a bay. And the very end of the cathedral in the west is called the narthex, where the main entrances are located at the front facade of the building. These small extensions on the walls are representing buttresses, which we'll see more of later. These are important for supporting the weight of the vaults and the roof. And in the east, the end of the cathedral ends in an apsidal shape, which is semicircular with several chevettes at the end. Those are the small half-circle extensions which will become chapels, and the middle part, called the choir, is where the main altar is located. And you might have also wondered if those dashed lines have a meaning. They show the shape of the ribbed vaults on the ceiling of the cathedral. So most of the cathedral uses four-part ribbed vaults, which are called quadripartite vaults, while the crossing has a more complicated rib pattern called a star vault. If you want to try to draw one of these yourself, I'll leave you a great source in the description to help get you started and understand the basic geometry and proportions. But apart from a floor plan, the master builder also draws a cross section which shows the cathedral head-on with the facade removed, and an elevation which looks a little bit like this, where you're looking at the side of the nave, and it shows the arcade, gallery, triforium and clerestory. And these three drawings are the most important drawings for the entire project, as they decide on pretty much everything. It's been a few years now, and it looks like the trees have been completely cleared and work is well underway for the foundations. Foundations are dug according to the floor plan, where the walls, pillars and buttresses will be, as they will be bearing the weight and they need solid bedrock to rest on. Foundation trenches have been dug for the east end, the crossing and the transepts, and the first two bays of the nave. However, the rest of the west end is still just marked out with pegs and cord. The west end isn't a priority right now, as the east end is the most important part of the cathedral and they want that to be ready to be used as soon as possible. The west end is left for later. And to make the foundations, they first dig through the soil until they find solid stone. This depth can range from a few meters to 8 or 9 meters in some cases. And once the trench has been dug, they fill it with a layer of mortar. This medieval mortar was made by burning chalk or limestone rubble in a kiln to produce quicklime, and then this was slaked with water to make lime putty, and then finally mixed with sand to get mortar. And this could have been done either on site or bought from manufacturers. And on top of the mortar, they built two rubble retaining walls on the outside, and in between they fill it with mortared rubble. And in some cases there's also a top layer made of sandstone. And these will be the foundations for the cathedral. And they lowered the stones into place using this crane here. So this axle over here, this is what lowers and brings up the arm of the crane. And this axle has a big wheel where one or more people have to walk inside to turn it. And this is what brings down and lifts up the rope. And a few new things have popped up around the edge of the work site as well. First of all, there's a blacksmith now. This guy is gonna have a lot of work throughout the entire building process. He will be making the tools needed, building equipment, maintenance, bars, nails, clamps, gates, grills, railings, door furniture, armature and so much more. Next to the blacksmith, the master builder also got his own workplace now. For sketching his drawings, he uses this thing called a tracing floor, which is like a sandpit except it's filled with plaster. This means it's hard enough to walk on, but he can use some sharp iron wire to scratch lines into the plaster. And at first the scratched lines are white and very visible, but after a while they fade to gray so he can make a new drawing on top. And the master mason only really uses 3 tools for drawing: an iron foot rule for straight lines, a set square for right angles, and compasses for curves. But curves could have also been done here using a nail and some rope. This is more for sketching, however permanent drawings were done on parchment. And lastly, there are also a few stonemasons workshops where the stonemasons cut the stone to the correct shape. There are actually quite a lot of different stonemasons with different jobs. First, at the quarry, there are the quarry stonemasons who extract rough chunks of stone. Then come the scapplers, they cut the stone with an axe to roughly the shape needed. Next, the stone travels to the work site over here, where the cutters or freemasons carve the stones into the correct shape. And lastly, the layers or rough masons are the ones responsible for placing the stones into their final position. There are also the setters, who will come later to assemble window tracery and other sculptured elements, and the sculptors who make the more intricate designs. And these stonemasons got paid at the end of every day according to the amount of stones they cut. But how did they know which stone belonged to who? Well, every stonemason marked their unique signature into the stone on an edge that wouldn't be visible when it was put into place. And it looked a little bit like this. Every stonemason would have their own little sign, and this way the master builder knew who to pay, but also which stonemason to hold responsible if a stone wasn't up to standards. And it was not actually uncommon to find 3 different mason's marks on one stone. One marked from the quarry stonemason, another one from the scapular, and a third one from the freemason or sculptor. Seven years have passed now since they began work on the foundations, and now there are already some walls standing. The east section is now complete, which means the cathedral is now in use and mass is being held here. Work has also started on the rest of the cathedral, mainly the crossing and the transepts. Here the arcade has been completed up to the gallery, however for the nave and facade of the cathedral this has only been built up to plinth height. Like I said, the nave has the lowest priority of the building. Work on this section will commence once the rest of the cathedral is complete. To build these walls, first they build up the pillars and then they make these arches here by first building a wooden centering, and then they lay the stones on top until they reach in the middle, and then this middle one is called the keystone, and this is what holds the arch in place. So now when I remove the wooden centering, the weight of these arches rests on this keystone and the arch doesn't collapse. And then when the mortar is set, they can just continue building on top. And this typical Gothic pointed arch shape redirects the weight of everything above it through the pillars straight into the ground, instead of the force acting horizontally onto the pillars and pushing outwards. And this is also the function of buttresses, but we'll talk more about those later. Here we can also see the vaults under construction. Before Gothic cathedrals, it was common to find solid stone ceilings, which put a lot of load on the walls because of the lateral forces due to the weight. However, for Gothic cathedrals, they figured out if you put stone ribs in an X shape, and once again make use of pointed arches, those ribs would carry all of the weight and you can fill up the gaps in between the ribs with a lighter material, and this way reduce the weight of the vault and the stress on the walls. So similar to the arches, first they make a wooden centering, then on top of that they lay the ribstones, in the middle goes the keystone, which was often richly decorated, and then the gaps in between get filled with stone or mortar webs, which were a lot lighter than solid stone vaults. And these ribs were also sometimes made from wood, however this wasn't fireproof, so stone is ideal. The walls themselves are made by placing blocks of ashlar stones on the outsides, and the space in between gets filled with rubble and mortar. Similar to castle walls, except these are a lot thinner. However, I will talk more about the width of the walls at the end of the video. Up here, work has started on the sloped roof on top of the vaults. The roof tiles are actually made from lead. They're made by casting molten lead on a bed of sand into sheets or tiles. And you can kind of see the roofing process here. First they make a wooden framework using great oak beams, which were often transported from over 40 kilometers away. Then the roof gets covered in timber boards, which are nailed to the rafters. Then comes a layer of insulation such as clay, sand or moss, which would protect the roof tiles from corrosion acids from the wood, and also protecting the wood from changes in temperature. And finally the lead sheets are laid on top in strips and held in position with an iron clip nailed into the roof boards. In some cases the roof was instead made from stone slates or ceramic tiles, but most of the time the roof was made from lead. And lastly, I haven't shown you the interior of the east end yet. Like I said, this part of the cathedral is fully complete now and it's already in use. It's been walled off to keep the dirt and the dust out, but if you go through, you can see what the interior looks like. But we're going to see more of the interior later on. So let's move on from now, take a little break, and see what the cathedral looks like in 20 years from now. Oh boy, a lot of stuff has changed. It looks like the crossing and the transepts are now completely finished and work is focused on the nave towards the facade. At the crossing they've also built a 73 meters tall spire, which towers over everything as if the cathedral wasn't big enough already. The spire itself is actually hollow, but if you look closely you can see the framework inside. The cathedral is coming along very, very nicely. But it's not done yet, the facade is still a pretty big part of the build, but we're definitely getting there. Let's go ahead and inspect the construction site first. As always, there's a lot of scaffolding for allowing builders to access all parts of the walls and the roof. And here we have a crane for hoisting the materials such as wooden beams or the lead roofing tiles or other materials up. And if we continue upwards, here they are working on the big roof of the cathedral. Laying the lead roof tiles, just like everything else revolving around lead, was done by plumbers. Not only would they lay the roof, they would also add lead guttering at the edge of the roof to catch the water, and the water would go through pipes through the buttresses and get ejected from the building through gargoyles. This prevents the water from just running down the walls and causing corrosion, breaking down the mortar in between the stones. These flying buttresses would also sometimes have aqueducts carved into them to help transport the water over this roof. Besides those, plumbers also made things like ventilation panels and the lead bars in latticed windows. They basically did everything that had to do with drainage and preventing water penetration. Anyways, let's return our focus back to the construction of this roof. Here you can see they are assembling the framework for the roof. And yes, I said assembling. They actually first make this frame down on the ground. And when they know everything is correct, they disassemble it and hoist it up using cranes all the way up to the roof and then assemble it again over here using pulleys. And this happens in a particular order. The first beam that gets laid down here is this beam right here called the tie beam. This is what provides a basis for a working platform. Then this big straight beam called the king post gets raised into position using a pulley system. Next up are the raking braces, which are these ones which extend from the ends of the tie beam to the king post. Next, there are also supposed to be some king post stiffeners around the base of the king post, which I forgot to build, like this. Next up are two collars, one over here and one up here, that extend from the king post to the principal rafters. And finally, the frame is completed by erecting these principal rafters, which go from the ends of the tie beam to the very top of the king post. And there are also these beams right here keeping the frames together. And all of these beams are connected together using oak pegs. They didn't use nails because every single nail had to be made by hand by a blacksmith, which was a lot of work. Nails were more often used for something like the hinges on doors, for example. And if I give myself some night vision, we can also take a look underneath the roof at the crossing. And I did try to make a skeleton for the spire. However, it's very difficult to create such a complex framework in Minecraft where one block is a solid cubic meter, so this framework might not be very accurate. And you might have also noticed these hooks here on the roof. Well, they're supposed to represent hooks. You see these a lot on big roofs or in areas where there's a lot of snow. These are called snow guards, and they allow the snow to stay on the roof for longer. Without these, the snow can just slide down the roof and it will all end up on the lower roof here, causing issues due to the weight of the snow. With the snow guards, the snow stays on the roof for longer, allowing it to all gradually melt. At some point the snow will start falling down when it has become softer, but it will fall down in smaller sections because of these hooks. And now we can talk some more about buttresses. Buttresses are used to take the outward forces on the walls of the cathedral caused by the roof and the vault and to redirect the pressure into the ground. So if you take a look at this image here, you can see the way the pressure gets redirected downwards following the curve of the flying buttress and traveling downwards straight into the ground through the buttress instead of allowing the weight of the roof and vaults to put outward pressure on the walls. And the very top part of a buttress above the highest flying buttress connected to it is called a pinnacle. And these are supposed to be highly decorated, however this is the maximum amount of detail I can give it in Minecraft. And these are here to keep the buttress itself together. They're pressing down with their weight to make sure that the buttress itself doesn't start curving outwards. The area around the cathedral has also changed quite a bit since 2 decades ago. Since the cathedral is getting close to completion, more and more people have been visiting, and it looks like there's a market happening today. Let's just go ahead and explore a little bit. A market is a great way to get some extra funds for the project. You can sell anything from spices to over here we got some weapons. There's also a lot of eye candy, you know, like this beautifully decorated gold armor. Probably not for sale, but people like looking at it. Here we got some food stands. You can get something to drink, you can get something to eat. There's also plenty of entertainment like this archery range where you can try your hand at archery. Or over here where we have a cockfighting arena. People would bring their most aggressive roosters, often specifically bred for the sport, and equip them with iron claws on their feet. and then two roosters fought until one of them was either dead or heavily injured. As you can imagine, a lot of people like to bet some money on these games. The sport was very popular throughout all of Europe for a long time. But yeah, there are a few more market stands around, like this fish stand over here, where you can buy fish, or here where you can buy candles. These are always very handy to have. Here you can buy some fresh bread. But apart from the market, the functional buildings also got an upgrade. The mason's workshops have stayed the same, they've just moved over here, but the blacksmith has definitely gotten an upgrade. You can see his forge is a lot bigger now, and he also has his own house, where at the bottom floor he has his shop where he can sell his tools. And at the second floor he has his own private quarters. Nothing special, just some beds for him and his family, and he also has his own desk to write and record his commissions and income. The master builder also got his own house, which he probably built himself. And if we go inside, you can see on the left we got his tracing floor again, maybe a little bit bigger this time. And on the right he has his own private workshop. Now, I might not have expressed the role of the master builder enough. He is not just the one who drew the floor plan and the sections and other big scale drawings, but he also makes stone or wooden templates of every single unique piece of stone that the cathedral is made of. And then the other stonemasons copy his templates. He is the one who draws and shapes the original templates for the walls, the plinths, the columns, the capitals, corbels, door cases, turrets, stairs, gargoyles, everything. Not only does he do that, he also coordinates the work site, he's telling the workers what exactly they have to do, he also keeps track of the materials and does the finance and pays the workers under him. He is responsible for everything. A lot of stress is on his shoulders. Master builders were highly respected men, often from the rank of nobles. They learned their trade from pure experience. They often only worked on one cathedral in their whole life. Some, if not most of them, not even living to see it finished due to age. But quite a few have also died from just falling off the scaffolding while inspecting a part of the building. I can't have anything but the utmost respect for the medieval master builders. So yeah, that's what he does here. He designs and makes the templates that the other stonemasons copy. And then up here he has his own private quarters, very similar to the blacksmith, only he has a bit more storage for all of his drawings. And now, after almost 50 years since the first stone was laid, since the first foundation was dug, since the first tree was felled, the cathedral is complete. Look at this beauty. The facade is complete, the nave is complete, the windows are in, everything is 100% complete. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at the facade here. So these are the entrances, although I only made the central one functional. The other two are just for show. But yeah, these, I don't know what to call them. These arches are actually supposed to be full of like small statues going all around. It's extremely detailed. However, unfortunately, in Minecraft, such detail isn't possible. And something that most people forget or don't know is that most statues used to be fully painted in bright colors. But unfortunately, paint doesn't survive 600 years like stone does, so we don't see much of it today. Anyways, let's go ahead and head inside and check out the interior. Look at this. And immediately you experience the effect of cathedrals. It drives your eyes upwards. So let's go ahead and take a small tour around the cathedral. Right now we are in the nave with lots of different small chapels in these bays, each one of these dedicated to a different saint. And right here is the pulpit where the priest can stand and give his ceremony. And now we have arrived at the crossing. Above us right now is the 73-meter tall spire. In the north transept there's just a simple altar. I didn't really know what to do here, but in the south transept here is the entrance to the crypt. The crypt is a stone chamber underneath the floor, and in this case there are some coffins here. However, relics could also be stored here. The entrance to the crypt could be like a staircase like I built here, or sometimes it was also just a big slab of stone that only gets lifted up when it's necessary. The crypt is not something that was supposed to be open to the public. Alright, let's continue. This section over here is called the choir. And this is where the main altar is located over here, and the bishop's seat is here as well. This is what makes a cathedral a cathedral. Without a bishop's seat, this would have technically just been called a church. So there are a lot of these choir stalls here, which are made from very detailed carved wood, and these provided seating for the clergy. These seats also have something called a misericord, which you can kind of sit on. It allowed the clergy to sit down during the ceremony without technically sitting down because they're still standing up. Because especially for older people, it can be hard to have to stand for hours on end, but this way they can rest their legs while still standing up. And like basically everything in a cathedral, the misericord is highly decorated, depicting religious, moralistic, mythological, humorous, and satirical themes. And lastly, we can walk around the ambulatory, but you've already seen most of this, I think. Over here we have a piscina, which is like a washing basin used to clean the communion vessels. But yeah, you've already seen this. There's just more chapels here. These apsidal chapels are called radiating chapels, and the one facing east is the axial chapel. What makes a cathedral so aesthetically pleasing are the proportions, and here you can see what I mean. You can see the nice proportions between the height of the arcade, the triforium, and the clerestory, with the arcade being just as high as the triforium and clerestory combined, and the triforium being 1/3 and the clerestory 2/3 of the height of the arcade. Now there were a lot of people involved with the interior of a cathedral. You got the carpenters that carved detail into things like the choir stalls. You got the glaziers who were responsible for the stained glass windows. There were smiths who forged decorative ironwork for gates and rails. And sculptors made statues in wood or stone. And tilers were responsible for designing, making, and laying the ceramic floor. And these ceramic floor tiles were made in a similar way to medieval brick roofing tiles. First, a hole was dug into the ground, then filled with firewood, which got lit on fire. Above that is a separate chamber where the tiles were stacked with a temporary dirt roof on top. The tiles then stayed there for a full week at a temperature of roughly 1000 degrees Celsius. And this was done with up to 40,000 tiles at once. And this was a very delicate process, as too much or not enough heat would fail the batch, causing all of the material to be wasted and a lot of money lost. Also, if it rained at any point in that week, the tiles would have been ruined as well. But the end result was well worth the risk, and cathedral floors were often extremely detailed. Especially the crossing in many cases is extremely detailed, but not just the ceramic tiles, but also various colored stones like lapis lazuli, limestones, marbles, porphyry, and serpentine, as well as colored glass. The walls were also whitewashed, sometimes with red lines to highlight the shape of the stones, and the vaults were also very often painted to show depictions of biblical scenes and figures, but unfortunately I'm not able to do that in Minecraft. The windows also have a very interesting manufacturing process. The colored windows always have these beautiful drawings on them playing with color and light. The glass itself is made from sand and plant ash, and the color of the glass is made by adding certain metallic oxides. For example, for blue, cobalt was used, for green, copper, for red, iron, purple is manganese, etc. The glass was then molten and blown, and like that, flat sheets of colored glass are formed. These sheets were then sent to the glaziers. They've already drawn the design for the window in full scale on a big table whitened with chalk or lime wash, and they've marked the different sections of the glass so they can lay the glass sheets on top of it and then trace the shape it needs to be on the glass. And then the glass gets cut using a hot iron rod and some final trimming with the grossing iron. And after they have the correct shape, more details are painted on the glass like facial features, cloth folds, and inscriptions with a black brush. And finally, the sheets get fired in a furnace, and then they are done and ready for assembly. They are then fitted into lead bar tracery, and now the window is complete. Now, most windows depict biblical figures, but the patrons of the cathedral, who were everyone that contributed financially to the building, also got a say in some of the window designs. It's not unusual to see a blacksmith working away on his anvil in one of the windows, or the Pope, or sometimes the master builder also has his own window where you can easily recognize him by his compass and square. And one last thing to mention, you might be thinking, shouldn't there be seats here in the cathedral? Well, the answer is no. In the Middle Ages, the cathedral was a social center. People would meet here to hang out, there would be markets held inside and other events such as plays or dances. Seats would just take in too much space. People always stood up during ceremonies. Seats only really became a thing post-Reformation. And with that, we have seen the entire build. 50 years of real-life work condensed into a 1-hour video. However, there are still some pretty important things I need to address. Some of my explanations weren't complete and there are quite a few inaccuracies with my build. Some of them because of bad planning since it's my first time ever building a cathedral, but also some stuff I physically couldn't get right because of the scale limitations in this game. Let's go back to the very first plot here. I said they built a cathedral out here because in a nearby city there wasn't enough space. And this has happened in history before. However, in most cases the cathedral was built inside of the city on top of an already existing church and not in a forest area. I also said the cathedral was commissioned by a bishop, which isn't wrong, but it's not always the case. Both the nobility and clergy wanted to build cathedrals. Most cathedrals were sponsored by royals or cities and not the church. Cities built cathedrals just to show off, competing for the biggest cathedral to attract the biggest market. Most Gothic cathedrals around Paris, for example, were commissioned by the French king just to assert dominance over the territory. I also want to talk about the timeline of this build. I used the timeline from Salisbury Cathedral in England because I could just find a lot of information about the building stages. But the cathedral itself is French Gothic style with the floor plan and dimensions heavily inspired by Amiens Cathedral in France, which was built from 1220 to 1270, where unusually the building started at the nave instead of the choir. Both of these cathedrals took around 50 years to complete, which was pretty fast for a cathedral. Most took over 100, some hundreds of years to complete. In stage 4 of the build they're also working on the vaults of the nave and they showed the ribs getting built here. However, this would have only been done after the roof above it was already completed. But then I couldn't show it off well. The nave vaults are also supposed to have ribs, but when I put them in place, the ceiling looked really bad. So for the sake of artistic license, I decided not to give the nave ribs. The walls of the cathedral are also just way too thick in Minecraft. Most cathedral walls were under a meter in thickness, but in order to have a different texture on the outside and the inside, my walls had to be at least 2 blocks thick, and then in order to make the windows look good, I had to make it at least 3 blocks thick with another block here at the bottom. Here in Minecraft, any depth I wanted to add to the walls increased the thickness of the walls by another full meter. But in reality, cathedral walls are quite thin. The walls of the Notre Dame in Paris, for example, are 0.915 meters thick, while the Chevet walls in Chartres Cathedral are only 0.485 meters. But that's the lower end of the spectrum and only at the Chevets. The reason the walls can get so thin in comparison to Roman-style cathedrals is because the weight of the vaults and the roof all gets carried by the buttresses. The walls only really need to carry their own weight. However, my thick walls caused some unforeseen issues that got apparent after stage 5. When planning the build, I didn't take the width of the walls into account, and here in the corners, these windows look pretty messed up. They're overlapping each other. There's also supposed to be another corner buttress in here that supports both this wall and this wall. But if you take a look here, the buttress would have to go over here and it's just not lined up at all. So yeah, I just didn't build the buttress. The roof itself also has some problems. When I first built the roof, I just went with an overhang because that's always how I make my roofs, but this is not how it's done with Gothic cathedrals. They never have an overhang. So it would look something like this if I had to change it now. Yeah, it does not look good, does it? Like this is just really ugly. And up here, well, it's supposed to have like a decorated edge that goes up like that, and then the roof starts behind. But there's just too much stone in between the windows and the decoration. So ideally, I would have to move the entire roof down by like 1 or 2 blocks, which would have broken more than it solved. So again, I just went with it. And one last comment about the roof is about the spire. The spire, as far as I know, is always hexagonal. However, at this scale I couldn't make it hexagonal in Minecraft. It just looked really bad, so I decided to just go with a round spire instead. I also encountered a lot of issues with detailing the interior of the cathedral, mainly caused by the scale limitations. The interior would have lots of statues and paintings, however I physically cannot build anything like a small detailed statue or a painting on a wall depicting angels. Minecraft scale just doesn't allow it. Same with the windows as well. I'm not able to add enough detail in windows for it to look realistic when the glass blocks are all like a cubic meter. So instead I just went with patterns, otherwise it just looked like an ugly colorful mess. And one last thing I just realized I forgot while recording. I didn't put any bells inside of the towers. Bells were rang to call people to the church or cathedral for a communal service and to announce the fixed times when the people had to pray. And the cathedral didn't just have one bell. For example, the Notre Dame of Paris has 10 different bells inside the 2 main bell towers. The left tower has 8 bells and the right one holds the 2 largest bells. And they could get big. The biggest bell in the Notre Dame, dating from 1686, has a diameter of 2.61 meters and weighs 13 tons. The people ringing the bells in the Middle Ages were well respected and got paid well, but they had pretty severe hearing damage if they weren't totally deaf. And with that, I think I have talked about everything I wanted to talk about. Oh my goodness. I spent so long on this project. I have been working on this project for 7 months, more than 7 months, like 300 hours of work. I hope you enjoyed the result, I hope you learned something new, and most of all, I hope I sparked an interest in medieval architecture in you, because it's wonderful. My sources for this video mostly came from an amazing book called How to Build a Cathedral by Malcolm Hislop. Highly recommend it. It goes into a lot of detail and covers pretty much every aspect of the building process. And if you enjoy reading books, I recommend The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, which first sparked my love for cathedrals. It is an exceptionally well written book, and the general storyline is about the building of a cathedral in medieval England. You can find these and my other sources in the description and image sources as well. Thank you for watching.